All right, I can see all of the participants start trickling in. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Kate, and I'm the Education Program Lead here at Sierra Club BC. Today, I'm currently tuning in from the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. If you haven't already, drop a message in the chat on where you're tuning in from, or if you're a class in a school tuning in, let us know where you're coming from. I'm personally really excited for this Learn to Draw on deep ocean ecosystems. I will be monitoring the chat and the Q&A to see if anyone has any questions so I can bring it back to our two speakers. But without further ado, I'm excited to introduce Megan Davies, who is a deep sea scientist, educator, and science communicator with research focusing on monitoring deep sea marine protected areas. And I'm also excited to introduce our returning drawing scientist, Dr. Julius Csotonyi. Today is a super special Learn to Draw because Julius has also done some deep sea research himself. But I will hand it over to the both of them to talk a little bit about the beings that we're drawing today.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kate. That's a wonderful introduction. This is going to be exciting. This brings back a lot of warm memories for me because I've been part of expeditions to the deep ocean, so having seen it in person just makes it all that much more exciting for me. And Megan, you as well.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to go on a cruise 2 years ago now, which seems crazy, time flies. But that was my first big introduction to actually seeing the deep ocean about as close as you can get, so from a ship. And it's just such a magical world. So excited to be here and hopefully answer some questions.
Yeah, magical is right. It's. I mean, I will never forget. And for me, it's been like, oof, it's been 23 years since the first one I went on, back in 2002. Yeah, so it's been a little while. And oh, actually, here, let me just show you guys a picture here. I've got that just so that. Oh, where did it go? Just a second here. Okay, it vanished. Oh, yes. Just so that it's yeah, this was supposed to work out a lot easier. But anyway, this was a fun little thing back. Evidence that, in fact, this did, in fact, take place. Back in 2002, you may barely recognize Amanda in the background there. It's the two of us processing samples that the ROV Ropos had brought up from the bottom of the ocean, and this was actually on Explorer Ridge, which is really cool because the first time that anybody had gone to see that since the 80s when it was discovered. And so we did a lot of exploring for the first time and mapping it out and naming chimney structures and all that kind of stuff. So it was really kind of fun. So yeah, it's been a while, but so yeah, so Megan, you shouldn't feel bad about being a while back. I got picked up at 10 times more back. I'm a fossil when it comes to this, but it's wonderful memories, right? Every time you see that and you get, yes, you can't get right to the bottom because we don't all have the opportunity to go in Alvin or something like that, one of the deep ocean submarines that actually take people down. But it's amazing to see live the pictures and the video from the bottom on board the ship when you're in the control room, and
Yeah.
you get and when you get to sit in the hot seat next to the pilot and direct the
Yeah.
sampling and the photography, right? Wow. So yes, so that was it's amazing. And so you've been to the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, right?
Yes. Yes, I have.
And so that's a way off in a whole other part of the world there. And there are these hot vents and deep, many kinds of deep ocean environments all over the world. My own experience has been off our west coast at the Explorer Ridge, and then the Juan de Fuca Ridge and Axial Volcano, which are about 200 or 300 kilometers off the coast of Vancouver Island. And then we have a lot of these kinds of hot vents, these hydrothermal vents that result from volcanic activity just below the crust in the ocean. And then, of course, we'll also talk about the fact that there's a lot of other kinds of deep ocean ecosystems out there besides these hot vents. but which also face threats these days of various kinds. Abyssal plains are a big one as well. Huge areas under the ocean that way.
Yeah.
And you, Megan, you've done work on highlighting some of these threats they face, right? As well as, how we need to protect them.
Yeah, so I'm just finishing up my master's. I defend it the end of this month, actually. So we're coming to the end now. But my research focuses on offshore marine protected areas, and they encompass so much of the deep sea, and we know of a lot of the threats that are facing the deep sea, but then there's a lot of nuance to these threats as well, because there's a lot about the deep sea that we don't know. There's a lot about these deep sea species that we don't know. And every time we go to the deep sea, we're discovering new species. So my research was kind of focusing on how can we best monitor these areas long term, given that they are extremely remote, very hard to put down equipment. We're talking very expensive equipment. And so takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of money. And so how can we best survey these areas and to get, essentially the best idea of what's happening in the system, given that we're seeing that the oceans are warming, we're seeing that there's a loss of oxygen happening, ocean acidification is happening. So my master's kind of looked at all those little pieces.
Really pertinent to today. That's going to be even more so as we go along. So I think I'm really glad that people like you are studying this, and I hope that some of our participants that we could, encourage them to take up studies in some of these. It's going to be a fascinating area, and so much to learn about an area that right now, in many of these cruises to the deep ocean, about 80% of the species that are recovered in samples are new to science in some cases. I mean, this area is one of the, even more than in rainforests, often we have unknown species to science. Like we've never seen most of these ever
It's
before.
really like our final frontier, which is kind of one of the reasons why I got interested in the deep sea to begin with, because, we were looking to space quite a lot, but we had this massive underwater ecosystem that we knew less about in terms of, relative to space. And it's right there to explore. And every time we go down, we find new really important underwater features and new species. And so it really is kind of the final frontier for us.
It's funny because it's not that far away when in terms of depth, it's anywhere from 1 to 3 or so kilometers depth. That's a distance that you can easily walk, in an hour or so if you could do that. It's just the pressures are so difficult for equipment, and we can't go down there ourselves.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, there are some new protected areas. I'm really happy about the latest one that Canada has protected, and so I'm going to try to pronounce it correctly, but it's the Hungwan Hutchwickok Sigis
Yeah.
marine protected area, I believe it is.
Yeah.
And it's a giant. It's a really big one. It has all of the hydrothermal vent areas and those kinds of seamounts in Canada located within it. And this is really nice to see. And we need to protect these better. We need legislation to protect them, because once they're gone, and we'll talk about some of these structures, they're probably gone for good.
Yeah.
Some of them are dynamic, other ones are really slow growing. Polymetallic nodules we'll talk about as well.
Mhm.
So with that, let me share my screen here. With the drawing, we'll have a preview of what we're going to be doing today. It's going to be fun because we'll talk about a lot of different things, but we're going to be doing one particular drawing to keep things simple and straightforward. I'm hoping that my connection here is not unstable. Let me just see. That's okay. And we'll share this one. So this is a preview of what we are going to do today. Okay, hopefully you guys can all see that. So what I've done is, this is very busy. We're not going to draw all of this, but I've drawn some of this so that we can talk about it as well. We're going to focus on the anglerfish in the middle. Okay, now this is not an animal that is only found on the bottom of the ocean. In fact, it's what we call pelagic. It's free swimming. It's found throughout the water column. And this is actually a very wide-ranging species. This is called the humpback anglerfish or the humpback sea devil. Or there's a few other interesting names for it. They come up with unusual names. This is a very strange looking fish. It's kind of football shaped. It's pretty small, actually, only about maybe 10 to 15 centimeters long. It looks monstrous though, somehow. So they're wonderful. And I thought it would be a fun one to do because it is such an unusual animal. And as such, it kind of really embodies the strangeness of the deep ocean, how different life forms are down there. The beings in the deep ocean often don't resemble anything that we're used to seeing on a day-to-day basis. And so anglerfish are a wonderful example. Also, they have a very, very cool ecology or ways of life that we'll talk about as we go. And in the background of this image, you can also see a lot of other things I've added that we'll talk about the environment of the deep ocean. And it's very, very diverse. And so think about this, is that what we're seeing here is a teeny tiny tip of the iceberg of what's really down there. Right, Megan? There's like
Yeah.
things. And Megan has some wonderful photos and videos that she's going to show as well from her exploration to the deep ocean. And that's always wonderful to see that. So what we're going to do is we'll launch into this. And as we talk about it, I think this will be probably the best way is whenever you feel like it is pertinent to show something, just bring it up there and then I will switch over to, we'll share your screen.
Okay.
Or if you want to do several of them to start off right now, we could just do that. And that way we won't have to go back and forth. Would you like to do some of that?
Sure, I can show, I guess, what a hydrothermal vent looks like. I've got some photos and videos of that. So I will.
Yeah. So one of the highest, highest biodiversity. Yeah. One of the most biologically diverse deep ocean habitats or ecosystem types. In fact, probably the most for deep oceans is these hydrothermal vent ecosystems, where you have water percolating into the crust in volcanically active areas. The water is superheated and then it blasts out through the surface, often at 300 to 400 degrees Celsius even, and creates these amazing structures as sulfide containing material and metal containing material precipitates out of the hot water and forms these strange chimneys, for example.
Yeah, so this one that we're looking at is from the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. And
Sorry, I'm sharing still. I'm sorry.
oh, sorry.
Yeah, where is it? Yeah, because I'm still showing mine. Here we go.
So this one was about it was over 7 meters tall. So essentially, as soon as there's a fissure in the Earth's crust, the water of the deep ocean is really, really cold. And so that water percolates down and then it gets superheated by the magma in our Earth's crust, in our Earth's core rather. And then it essentially, that superheated water shoots back up. And so anytime you see these, what we call black smokers, so this black plume, that is indicative of a hydrothermal vent that is very, very hot. There are some hydrothermal vents that emit water that isn't as hot. But in this case, this one was about 350 to 370 degrees Celsius. And everything that you're seeing on here, so there are tons of little moving creatures, and those are a type of hydrothermal vent shrimp. So these are Remicaris, and they are a shrimp that essentially houses a symbiont that can take sulfur and change it into energy. So you will see these shrimp really kind of darting through the black smoke. And it's because they have these symbionts. So they have to get close enough to the black smoker to get that sulfur without burning themselves on the hot water. But yeah, go ahead, Julius.
I was just going to say, just so that people are aware. So the symbionts, these are bacteria that live within or on the surface or within the tissues of the shrimp, right? And they carry out, as you said, the conversion of energy and chemical energy that's provided in the smoker plume to create sort of basically sugars, which then they kind of share with the shrimp.
Yeah, and we get a wide variety of species that you find on these vents. So for instance, here you're seeing a lot of fish that are draping themselves over these rocky outcrops. So this is a type of Pachycara fish. You oftentimes see them in hydrothermal vents. And we can see some anemones as well. These are carnivorous anemones that we're seeing in the background, and they will eat the shrimp if the shrimp comes in contact with them. And yeah, so you can get quite a diversity of different types of species, and you can find that there's very, very high biomass in these areas.
That's
We had
amazing.
a question in the chat that can be answered, which is how do these creatures live in both extreme heat and then nearby very cold water?
Yeah, so where you're seeing this shimmering water here, for instance, that would be quite hot, but the water in the deep sea is very cold. So, it's going to be around like 3 degrees. So the water, as soon as it comes out of the black smoker, is in fact really, really hot, but it very quickly cools by the surrounding seawater. It gets cooled down really quickly. And so if animals aren't careful, they absolutely will get burnt by the water. So we actually did see some shrimp that had clearly got too close for comfort. But the water surrounding, so the fish, for instance, really like these areas because it creates kind of nicely lukewarm water for them. It's kind of like a spa. It's just kind of nice, relaxing water. Because yeah, between the very cold water of the deep sea and then the very hot water of the hydrothermal vent, the whole area gets, pretty regular temperature really quickly.
That's wonderful. That's spectacular stuff.
Amazing. I think we should maybe move on to starting our drawing.
Okay, sounds
Yeah.
Just
and
looking
then
at the
we'll go and
time.
switch back as yeah, sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay, so the nice thing about this fish that we're going to do is actually a pretty simple one. Strange looking, but relatively simple. And so it's going to be straightforward to do it. Let's switch over to my screen here. And okay, it should be coming through shortly here. Yes, yeah, there we go. Okay, excellent. Okay, so hopefully you can all see that again. Thank you, Megan. That was wonderful. You don't see often many videos of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge hydrothermal events, so that's really amazing to actually see that. I love seeing the shrimp with you saw the little bright little spots on the backs of the shrimp. The really cool thing about that is that contains the same pigment that's in our eyes that's used for vision, and it allows the shrimp to literally see the hot water. And so they know which way to swim to find the best conditions so that the bacteria that they're symbiotic with can have access to those chemically, those energetically, highly energetic chemicals that they need to make basically sugars, which is just spectacular when you think about the ways that evolution has gone to make these organisms able to customize their position in these environments. Just fantastic. So what we're going to do is we're going to start drawing this. I'm actually going to leave up the background there and then just work with the fish. But I'm going to point out to begin here that, again, it's a very biologically diverse and habitat-wise, ecologically diverse environments in the deep ocean. You have these black smoker chimneys that Megan had pointed out. These are located in a few areas. There's quite a few of them, but they're very, very small regions, typically, these volcanically active areas. Most of the deep ocean is actually consisting of what I'll call abyssal plains. These are deep, kind of like prairies in the deep ocean. And you have these large flat areas. And on these flat areas, you have less life than in some of these areas, but there's still a lot of life. And one of the things that we find in many of these abyssal plains on the benthos, on the bottom of the ocean, are these fields of what look like golf balls or like little black oranges. They're called polymetallic nodules or manganese nodules. Polymetallic, like poly from many and metallic from metals. They contain many metals, several different kinds of metals, and they slowly grow over time. By time, I mean like geological time. They grow something like about a centimeter per million years in size. And so some of them are about 10 centimeters or so in size. And you realize that those are millions of years old. There are billions of these on the bottom of the ocean. And so this is a common feature in some regions of the deep ocean. So that's why I drew on the right side there these bunch of like little golf balls. This is what the bottom of the ocean in some places looks like. Not everywhere. There are some regions where they're clustered, but it's an important thing because these provide a hard surface for other animals to inhabit, to attach to. And you can see I've got soft coral and sponges and so on that use these nodules as attachment points so they can survive on an area that otherwise is like a muddy benthos, muddy bottom. So this is going to be important because those metallic nodules are very much targeted for deep ocean mining. And we have to be very careful with that because when those are removed, they'll be gone forever. We'll never see them again. It'll take millions of years for them to come back. And we've removed all of the habitat for many animals in many cases. So this is something to keep in mind. So I'm going to start by removing the preview of our anglerfish and then start drawing it. So something to keep in mind, this anglerfish that we have here that we're going to draw is a wonderful animal. We're looking actually at the female. The female of this species is very different from the male. The male is tiny. So the female's already pretty small, but the male is tiny. And we're going to get into talking about that in a short while, but they have enormous difference in that. Yet another way in which they differ from most of the life that we typically see. So I'm going to start drawing this. And actually, there's the male. Sorry, let me just, my computer's responding a little bit slowly, so bear with me. That's the female, and there's the male, just to show you the size difference. They're a really interesting being and how different they are, the male and the female, and we'll talk about their ecology or how they live their lives as we go. But I'm going to start drawing the female. The female is the one you most often see. It's the one that looks monstrous with the big teeth and so on. It's just a wonderful animal. They're not actually monstrous. They are really well evolved to be ambush predators. They sit and wait. They just kind of hover along in the ocean, very, very low energy. And they have this giant mouth that snaps up prey when they encounter it. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to draw in two sort of lines. So I'm going to draw a red line to indicate where you want to draw lightly. This is kind of, we've done this in the past, and then we want to be able to erase out these lines or not have them so visible. It's a guide kind of thing. And then when I say I'm going to draw heavier, that's going to show up as black on my image. So I'm going to start with a light line to draw kind of the guide for the body shape. Kind of think of like a big teardrop shape kind of thing. So we're going to go like this. Oops. Oh, sorry. That kind of, let me redo that. Sometimes it does funny things. Okay, I'm going to draw this strange teardrop shape. Not quite a teardrop, but close to it. You'll see that it has a little bit of a pointed end here. Kind of like a warped vase. Maybe like a vase that has been exposed to hydrothermal vent fluids and partly melted or something, to put into perspective. So that's kind of the guide for the overall shape of the body there, okay? And then the other big part that we have is the mouth, right? Because that's one of the massive parts of this fish. These fish are amazing. They can actually eat other animals that are bigger than themselves. And so they have to have a mouth that is way bigger proportionally to their body than is ours. And so we're going to draw a guide, again, a light line here for roughly where the mouth is. Kind of a V shape. Like that. These guys are like something you might expect in a cartoon, the way they look. The proportions are so off compared to most animals that we see. It's almost ridiculous. So that's kind of like the guidelines that we want to put in place, but that'll help us to draw the actual lines for the body. Because proportions, as an artist, it's something we want to keep in mind, is to get the proportions right. And so sometimes we like to kind of draw these guides initially. So I'm going to start now to draw in some of the more details, the better details, like the body itself. So I'm going to switch to it black. So this is like your heavier lines now. You're really just kind of going to follow along that line that you drew, the light line first, but don't go through the mouth. We'll leave that and we'll follow along the edge of the mouth instead of completing that vase, basically. And I also add this little bit of a nick down here at the corner of the mouth, because that's how they do it. They've got this bit of an sort of an overhang of the upper jaw. Whoops, sorry, that my computer did the funny thing. I didn't want that cross line there. Yeah, it does that sometimes. And we'll just continue. And it's got this really big chin. So it's got a pretty hefty mouth on a strange football-shaped body or vase-shaped body like that. And now we're going to also complete the body by adding the tail. And the tail is nothing really that spectacular. It's really just kind of a small spoon-shaped tail. Now, one of the things that you know about, if you've seen fish, the shape of the tail tells you a lot about how the fish swims. So tuna have this, what's called a lunate tail. It's shaped like a crescent moon, and that shape of tail is excellent for really high propulsion, fast swimming. These guys are the opposite. They have this spoon-shaped tail, not very good for pushing water. It's a very slow swimming fish, but basically it hangs around. And there's this wonderful video from the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute, or MBARI, that shows probably the first video that's ever been taken of this species in the wild. And it's just hanging there with its nose downward and just kind of beautifully moving its dorsal fin, the upper fin on the top of it, and its tail in this wonderful sinusoidal fashion. So that's actually what I used as a reference for this drawing, to show that it's kind of got this downward tipped snout. And other anglerfish do this too. They hang upside down. Like there's a whip nose anglerfish that for the longest time, nobody knew why, but it seems like they naturally hang upside down and their lure kind of comes way down. Speaking of the lure, this is one of the coolest aspects of anglerfish. Okay, so now we've got the tail in place roughly. I want to put something else on this animal now that we're going to focus on very much, and that's called the lure. The lure is a specialized organ. Well, it's actually called an esca, which is basically the fins of fish have these rays, right? This one is a specialized ray that's moved way to the front of the body, and it's expanded. And it's got this long, so I'm going to draw it out here, from the tip of the top, the front of the jaw. There's this long structure that hangs out like this, and it's got a bulb at the end. Like that. And then the very end of the bulb, so normally this fish is pretty black, very black. Okay? This is, interestingly, the name actually, the scientific name, Melanocetus, means black whale. If you translate the Latin, it's kind of neat that way. It's a very dark colored fish. But the end of this lure is not just lacking of the black pigment, the melanin, but it glows. It actually glows in the dark. And so this is called bioluminescence. Bio meaning life, and luminescence, the production of light. So this is living light, basically. What happens is that these fish, kind of like how the shrimp that Megan, you talked about, form a partnership or a symbiosis or mutualism with certain bacteria that help them to survive by using chemicals from the hot vents to create sugars that they share with the fish. In this case, this is another example of a mutualism, or a mutually beneficial symbiosis or close association, where bacteria called enterovibrio get picked up from the environment. These bacteria have the ability to produce light using an enzyme called luciferase and a chemical called luciferin. And when the two combine using oxygen, it produces light. These bacteria are capable of the superpower. When they colonize the end of the lure of this anglerfish, the anglerfish gets the superpower of being able to produce light using its lure. There's a reason this is called a lure. In fact, it is a fishing rod, basically. It is a way for the anglerfish to not have to swim around and chase prey. Basically, it allows fish to come to it, fish and small invertebrates that see this light and think, ooh, maybe there's a meal there. They come close and they don't realize that there's this giant mouth waiting for them. And the anglerfish just snaps them up when they get close to it. So that lure, this end here, it glows. And that attracts animals, and the anglerfish just snaps them up when they get close enough. So it's the coolest thing that way. We're going to continue drawing the mouth area of this animal now. So there's actually a little bit of a funny little jawline as well happening here that comes at the bottom of the chin, kind of a sharp tip like that. And then there's a bit of a line that comes up along the side like this. You're seeing basically the structure of the skull of the fish under its skin a little bit there. And that corner at the bottom, right here, there's a hinge there where the jaws are able to open wide and snap shut. That's what you're seeing, that corner there. It's got small eyes. The little eyes, it doesn't need much vision here. It doesn't chase prey. It's not an active predator there. It's an ambush predator. It lets stuff come to it. So it can detect the presence of fish nearby because it's got very sensitive organs on its skin that allow it to pick up vibrations in the water. And when fish get close enough, it can snap them up. But the eye is up here, just under the lure, and it's pretty small, like that. Just cartoonish looking. I mean, they're ridiculous looking. They're wonderful animals. The teeth are what really give it this wonderfully monstrous appearance. And these teeth are wonderful because when you look at the teeth of an animal, it tells you so much about how they feed and what they feed on. The teeth of large carnivores on land, like dogs, for example, are very thick. There are some sharp, curved ones, but they're very thick, hard. They're great for grasping things and crushing them. When you look at the teeth of anglerfish, as well as some crocodilians that feed on fish, you see these very fine comb-like teeth. And those kinds of teeth, and I'm going to draw them here, are that way because they're really great for grasping slippery prey like fish and holding them in place. But these fish don't have a lot of power, so it's okay if they're not terribly strong. But the very thin teeth are excellent because they work kind of like a comb or like have you ever seen a Venus flytrap? You know, those kinds of the fringes of their leaves for catching flies are excellent. They basically form a trap, and when they close the mouth, they don't have to close it fully, but everything that's in between these teeth gets stuck for good because they get, you know, well, not entangled, but it's ensnared. It's really a neat way. So that you can see that these teeth are very well evolved for clamping down on slippery fish and other maybe small invertebrates that it might encounter. But it makes it look absolutely monstrous. But in fact, they're very, very brittle teeth, and it's very easy to break them. So they can't actually feed on anything large. Well, large by our standards. They can feed on things that are larger than themselves, but they swallow them whole, basically. They just need the teeth to grasp them so they don't get away. And then they swallow them. They don't chew them, just swallow them whole. They've got this stomach that can expand to like several times the size of before. It's incredible. If you look at the size of the stomach, what we're seeing here in this drawing is a very hungry fish. It has nothing in its stomach, but that stomach, and I'm going to draw what the stomach might expand to. If we were to see it having finished off a giant meal, and some of these have been found to contain 2 snipe eels inside of their belly, which are also very interesting fish in that they can eat large things. But the stomach would expand this big, potentially. So I'm just going to draw a line here. That's how large the stomach can get. So sometimes these fish can look absolutely ridiculous when when you look at them when they've got a full stomach full of stuff in it. And so that's kind of an idea of how big they can get.
It's like if you've ever seen a video of a humpback whale feeding where they take a big scoop of water and then they've got, they essentially filter out the water and keep all the fish inside. Their stomachs can expand like that. So they've got a lot of very soft tissue that is able to expand like a bag essentially and fill up.
Now that's an excellent analogy. That's right. Like and you can see in the case of humpback whales, they've also got those grooves on the pharynx that allow it to stretch. So it's like spandex kind
Yeah.
of. It's like they got spandex stomachs in this case. They expand crazily, and so you can get giant meals. But the nice thing here is that you got to think about the deep ocean is very low in nutrients often. And so you need to get your meals when you can and hold on to as much as you can. You got to engorge yourself because you don't know when the next meal is coming. There aren't a lot of animals that you encounter down there, and it's pitch black. So, these guys don't hunt them actively. So if you can get a big meal, take it. So they've evolved to be able to stretch the stomach like crazy. And so they can hold on to a meal and digest it slowly because they don't swim fast. They don't need a lot of energy. They can get by for long periods. But they do have these wonderful teeth that they can ensnare slippery fish with. And they eat eels as well. Like I was talking about snipe eels being one of them. So you need to be able to have something that can grab an animal and just kind of like, work its way down into the stomach gradually. Because you can't swallow an eel very easily in one shot. So you kind of have to go gradually. If you've ever seen a snake eating something large, they will kind of move their mouth along it as they go. And it's sort of similar to that. So yeah, that's a really good analogy with the whale, actually. The fins of these fish are not much to speak of either. The pectoral fins, which are kind of the equivalent or homologous, the evolutionarily the same sort of source as our hands or our arms, are on the sides of the fish. They actually look pretty large. So it looks like this. But they're not very powerful. They're not really used for swimming much, maybe more for a little bit of stabilizing. They
And
kind
kind of burst movements. So like you said that they're an ambush predator, they're a really perfect example of form speaking to function. And so the fact that they're this very squat fish, they've got this jaw facing upwards, they have to do a very quick scooping kind of motion. And so those types of fins that are broad like that help with a very quick start and stop motion, but not, you wouldn't see them doing long distance swimming.
That actually makes, yeah, that's actually a really great point because, yeah, you can see them why they're shaped the way they are. They've evolved to benefit the fish best in these conditions. So yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, not much swimming, but when they need it, it's like boom. You
Yeah.
gotta grab your prey really fast or it'll swim away because they're also trying to survive, right? He's got a couple of other fins. There's what's called an anal fin, and that's at the very bottom of the fish, and it's shaped like this, kind of a. Yes. It doesn't do a whole lot except stabilizing. And then there's a dorsal fin. Now, I've drawn this, or I'm going to draw this dorsal fin in kind of a weird, wonky, twisted way. The reason for that is because I watched that video of this fish swimming, and it's really beautiful. It uses this dorsal fin in this beautiful sinusoidal motion. So if you look at it from above, I just kind of drew it a little bit. Oh, let me just take out the glows thing here. If you look at the animal from above, this is what it would look like with the mouth open, and there's the lure in the middle, and then on top there you see this weird twisty kind of a fin. That's the dorsal fin, or the one on its back, and it just moves in a beautiful sinusoidal sort of wave-like form along with the tail, and that's how it does most of its slow motion. And so I'm going to draw that fin, the dorsal fin, in that sort of a way while it's twisting around. So here's what it looks like when I do that. I'm going to draw it on the back of the fish, but then it kind of comes down and twists around like this. Like this. And then if we add, like the fins all have what are called rays. These are little bony support structures, right? So sharks have fleshy fins. You don't see these rays in them. They in fact don't have the same kinds of rays. These are characteristic of what are called ray-finned fish. These are a group of fish that evolved later than sharks, and they have these very visible bony rays in their fins, and so they help them to keep stiff, or at least stiffer than they otherwise would be. And so I'm going to add the rays to the various fins. So the pectoral fins, the ones that the paired fin behind the head, has these little rays, and it looks really, really beautiful when you see it, because it's kind of, it gives it a comb-like appearance. And if you've ever seen fish, if you've ever gone fishing and caught fish, you'll notice that most of the kinds you catch are ray-finned fish, and they have these wonderful rays. And then you have a few, about 4 or 5 of them in the anal fin. Not very many. It's not a very complex fin. It's not used for a lot. The tail has really neat kinds of rays. Actually, they're forked. And so each of the rays in the tail ends, it splits like this. So there's a few of these, and they split. This is kind of interesting that way. So some fish have split rays like this. And just a few of those. And then the last fin that we talked about before is the dorsal fin, the one on the back. And it also has a series of rays, but the way I'm going to draw those rays is to show them sort of bending along with the fin, because there are muscle attachments to the base of these bony rays, and it's there that the fish can control the direction of each of these rays sort of almost independently, so it can create this wonderful bendy motion of its dorsal fin. So you get these individual rays, and then as I go along, you'll see they start to kind of bend. What we're seeing actually here is that the fin, as we go backward here, bends toward us, and so you actually, in art, we would use this. We would see this as what's called foreshortening. When something that is flat is facing edge on toward you, you only see a little narrow bit of it, and that's what we're seeing toward the back here. We're only seeing a bit of the fin because it's mostly edge on, and these rays back here continue like that, and it actually connects to the other side of the animal. So it's kind of weirdly bending.
Julius, do we know
Sorry?
why the rays in the tail fin are split?
Good question. Actually, Megan, do you have any knowledge about these guys? Because I'm not entirely sure. It's a really good question, actually. Sometimes I'm guessing that it allows it to spread out a bit more.
Yeah, I think it just adds support, but in terms of why it evolved to have split, yeah, the split rays, I'm not sure, but it certainly in the case of its tail, it would add support.
Yeah. Well, and this is also another thing. It's an ambush predator, as you mentioned. Because of that, it needs to have bursts of speed. So it may well be that what we're looking at here is that whereas the dorsal fin is constantly moving to keep the fish stable, it's a very slow motion. But the bursts of speed are probably accomplished by a combination of those pectoral fins on the side and mostly the tail fin, probably. So it would just massively speed up. And so more support there would be really effective when the fish is needing these very sudden bursts of speed to catch, to close the distance to the prey that is only a few centimeters away, but like lightning fast.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's probably what's happening there, is that it is support, and there's probably good reason for that, for when it needs very, very sudden bursts of speed. But that's speculation on my part,
Yeah.
but it may well be what's happening there, and you're right about the support, I think. So that's kind of a really interesting little bit there. So this is something that we can look up afterwards. The other thing that we have here is this fish needs to be able to breathe, right? Now, we breathe air, fish breathe water, but they get the oxygen out of the water, and they have gills for that. We don't have gills, we have lungs, but fish gills are normally placed behind the head and in front of the pectoral fins, those paired ones. The weird thing about this one is that the gill is actually placed underneath and a little bit sort of behind the pectoral fin, kind of a weird opening like this. It's also quite small compared to the long gills of some shark species that are very active, or large active fish like tuna, long gills. This also tells us about the lifestyle of the animal. Very slow moving, doesn't need a lot of oxygen. In fact, this species of fish can survive in areas that are very oxygen deprived. And that happens in some parts of the deep ocean. In fact, it can even get into what called anaerobic areas, which are lacking in oxygen entirely for some periods of time. And it's okay there for a bit because it doesn't use a lot of oxygen. And because it doesn't use a lot of oxygen, it doesn't need so much of a massive gill structure to take oxygen out of the water. It can go on very small amounts. So it has very underdeveloped gills compared to many other fish. It's kind of neat to see this, as you mentioned, Megan, the form and function being so closely related here. Evolution basically results in organisms that are the most efficient for their environment typically. And so if energy is not needed to make really elaborate gills, then the animal gets along more easily in an environment that doesn't have a lot of energy. Very, very cool how these things work together.
I studied the movement patterns of water around chimera fish, and so actually the placement of these gills and the size, it doesn't need very much oxygen, but it can where it's placed relative to its pectoral fins is like a perfect pushing motion when it does move its pectoral fins to guide it straight into its gills as well. So it's very well designed.
That is really cool, actually, when you think about these kinds of details, the specific details of the structure and how much you have to pay attention to the form that you're looking at and how much it tells you about the animal. This is really cool. That's a neat thing. I had no idea. Very awesome. The other thing that we're going to add here, just the last few things on this fish now, is some of the textures on the face. And there's some important things here. So interestingly, remember one of the names of this fish is a sea devil. And it's actually got a couple of neat little, almost horn-like little projections on the top of its head. It's got a pair. So above the eye, these are just parts of the skull that are showing through, but it looks a little bit like a horn. So it's kind of neat that way, actually. It's also got nares, which are kind of the nostrils. These are only used not for breathing, but just for like chemical detection, for, sampling the water, tasting it basically. In front of the eye there. And then there's also, you can see a little bit of the structure of the bones under the surface. So around what, the areas where you would expect there to be lips, it doesn't have lips, but you can see the structure of the bones underneath the face, around the mouth there. They're thickened in that area. Plus, there are these really neat bony projections that come out from the along the I believe that these might actually be struts at the gills, but they also help to give the fish some form. So along from under the throat, you see these kinds of little bit of ridges that come up, kind of like this. And they kind of have a bit of an elbow in them as well. These are not like separate from the fish. They're like little ridges that show up on its surface. Okay. And the other thing here that we're going to add to the fish, kind of the last thing, is that it has a series of structures along its face, especially, that are very, very sensitive to vibration in the water. Okay, so this is part of its lateral line system. So the lateral line on fish is a very special organ that usually goes along the side of the fish, lateral on the side, that is a fluid-filled tube that can react to vibrations in the water. And that's how they can tell. Basically, it's kind of like hearing in a way. They can tell when objects are moving around them. They can detect prey that are swimming or predators approaching. And in the case of anglerfish, they've got a series of these little structures. They look like pores along the face, for example, and you can actually see them when you look at the fish. That make them really sensitive to movement like that. Okay. So that's our weird female. Now, the neat thing is I mentioned the male is this tiny, tiny little animal compared to the female. It's a really neat thing. Anglerfish have a very interesting way of laying eggs. There's a lot of deep ocean out there and not a lot of these animals. And so to find each other is difficult. So if they wanted to reproduce, it's tricky to find each other. So anglerfish have evolved these ways in which there's a temporary or permanent connection between the male and the female. In this case, in this species, the male will temporarily latch onto the female and hold on using its teeth for a while. The female will lay eggs, and then the male will fertilize them outside of the body. And that allows the eggs to be fertilized in a predictable way. And then those will hatch later on. Then the male will detach and swim along and find other females. But there are other anglerfish that are way weirder and cooler than this. There are some species where the male will find a female, latch on, bite onto the bottom of the female's belly, and then it will literally grow into her. Their bodies will fuse. Their blood supplies will fuse and they will share the same circulatory system. This is permanent. There's no escape after this point. The male becomes a part of the female's body. And that way, it can fertilize eggs very predictably whenever the female produces them. It's the neatest evolutionary adaptation for an environment where it's really hard to find mates. So neat diversity, really cool diversity.
Yeah, it's interesting about this particular anglerfish, the fact that the males and females stay separate. And so, unlike a lot of other anglerfish, they can both reach sexual maturity without encountering one another. Whereas other anglerfish, they only reach sexual maturity once they have fused together. And then they are, yeah, bound for life, for good or for bad. And then, but with this anglerfish, he will temporarily attach and then wait until she produces the eggs, fertilize them, and then will just swim off and try to find a new mate.
Yeah, it's pretty neat when you think about it too, because those ones that only reach sexual maturity once they attach, it's also a form of efficiency because they don't have to use up energy to make themselves sexually mature until there's an opportunity for that to be useful.
Yeah.
Again, efficiency is the bottom line when it comes to the deep ocean because there's so little energy there. The energy typically comes as what's called marine snow. It's biological material from dead animals and such and dead plankton that slowly drifts down to the deep ocean from the surface because that's where light is present to be able to power photosynthesis, which then allows animals to eat the photosynthetic plankton, which then supplies more food for more animals, larger animals, and so on, and get a food web forming. But the deep ocean is typically supplied only by the dead material that kind of snows down from above, except in places like hydrothermal vents where you have what's called chemosynthesis instead of photosynthesis. The use of chemical energy like sulfide that comes up from in the water from these chimneys that then bacteria use as a source of energy to create food for themselves, and that is also shared with animals in these symbiotic mutualistic connections. And with that, I'd like to point out that the deep ocean, Megan and I have both seen how incredibly fragile it is. It is these structures, these sulfide structures, when we were going in our expeditions, we have to be really careful with the remote operated submersible so you don't accidentally bump them a little bit. You can knock them right over very, very easily if you're not careful. So submarine pilots have to be super careful. And each time one of these things is knocked over, it's like it's a skyscraper of life. This is where life attaches to, as Megan's beautiful videos showed. So much life is attached to them, so we have to be super careful. Unfortunately, it is also these sulfide structures are rich in metals. Now, because we are rightly transitioning away from fossil fuels, because they create a lot of greenhouse gases, to more sustainable forms of energy generation for ourselves, such as solar power, wind power, and a few others, there's a need for certain metals for some of these components, like batteries and electric cars need various kinds of metals. There's lithium, cobalt is another one, solar panels, and
Magnesium.
Sorry?
Magnesium as well.
Magnesium, even in wind farms, the windmills need some of these metals. So unfortunately, now there's a big demand for them. So there's a movement toward the development of deep ocean mining. They're going to send giant tracked vehicles into the deep ocean to harvest both these sulfide structures, the dead ones they plan that aren't actively venting, but that's still a habitat for many animals. Any hard surface is in the deep ocean. And also what we mentioned before, these fields of these polymetallic nodules, these baseball-like things, which are rich in metals. It seems like they're lifeless when you look at them, but you look closely, many animals attach to them because, again, hard surface. And it was recently found that there is a strong indication that they may be producing oxygen, it's called dark oxygen, through likely an electrochemical reaction that takes place because of the combination of metals within them. It's really cool. And the importance of that is if they are producing dark oxygen, because there's no real photosynthesis down there, although I studied phototrophs in the deep ocean. That's a whole other interesting thing with hydrothermal vents. There's enough hot water to actually be glowing in infrared, and bacteria can use that like plants light. Maybe crazy. But mostly there's no photosynthesis. And if they're producing oxygen, these nodules, then that may be increasing the oxygen content of areas of the deep ocean that are normally very low in oxygen, and which will get even lower in oxygen as climate change progresses. Warmer water holds less oxygen, and that's what's going to happen. So these nodules may be crucial for deep ocean life to even exist down there in the way that it does. You remove them, and they won't be back for millions of years. It will probably cause many extinctions. I mean, even if they don't produce oxygen, just the surface is very important. So we have to think about, we need to have more research before we can understand how deep ocean mining will affect these communities. So there's now a lot of movements, a lot of conservation organizations that are pushing for legislation to halt the progression of deep ocean mining, which isn't happening really much yet. We have a chance to stop it or to be more careful about it before we start. Maybe we create synthetic nodules and replace what's down there for animals to grow on. I don't know. I know we need the metals. I'm actually a proponent more for asteroid mining. That would be a really great farm. But it's likely going to happen. So we need to push for legislation that better controls how mining can take place. Personally, I'm kind of against deep ocean and mining because I know how fragile the ecosystems are down there. We need people to become more familiar with it. Megan and I have both provided some links for wonderful organizations that you can learn more from about the risks that deep ocean organisms, beings down there face, and what you can do to help support pushing for more careful regulation of deep ocean mining, for example, so that we do as little damage as we can, while allowing us to transition away from very harmful fossil fuels. We don't want to harm one ecosystem while trying to save the others, right? So we got to find a balance. We're smart. We can figure out ways around this, and asteroids are out there, for example. And that's most of what I have to say. Megan, sorry, I've been really rambling and just kind of hogging the stuff.
No, that's okay. I've been trying to answer chat messages, so this has been great. But yeah, I mean, I guess when I think about deep sea mining, I always think about it's kind of like messing with the batter before it's done baking. We don't know enough about the deep sea, and every time we go down, we're discovering new things. And so the idea that we're going to put down these big machines and knowingly cause destruction is something that personally I can't get on board with when we don't know the system enough to know what level that destruction is actually going to have, like what effect that's going to have. So until we have a better understanding of the deep sea, I don't think we should be exploiting it.
I so agree with you. I mean, I think it's the only reasonable thing. We often think about, when we evaluate what we should be careful with and whatnot, we often put it in the perspective of, well, what else could we get from here? Like, we shouldn't mine these because maybe they're a source of like biomedicines or something. But let's stop and think about that for a second. We often think in terms of what's useful for us, but shouldn't we also think about the fact that even if life forms in the deep ocean, let's say, were never found to be of use to us, which is not the case, but even if they weren't, shouldn't we also, out of compassion and as responsible beings, just respect their right to exist as well, whether or not they're useful to us? That's the way I see it. I personally enjoy movies like, science fiction movies, like there's Avatar, for example, had this interesting idea of a planet being conscious and protecting itself. Well, we don't have that on Earth, but we do in the sense that's us. We are that consciousness that can actually choose to protect other life on Earth. And to me, that is so inspiring and wonderful to realize that we have this ability. Let's use it. Let's contact our legislators, our political leaders, government officials at every level, federal, provincial, municipal. Do what we can, reach out and say, this is important to us. Please protect it. Let's find ways to do that. Share what you know with your friends. Find out more. There's so much to know and so much we can do. And there is always hope.
Thank you so much for sharing. Someone in the chat also would like to know if there's a reference photo that you would want to share that you used to create the illustration.
Actually, better than that, there's a beautiful video. It's in the links. There is let me just see here. The one from the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute.
I think Mary just put it in the chat for us.
Excellent. Okay, good. That one, and I'm going to stop sharing here in the meantime to see the chat as well. That one has this beautiful, that's the one. It has a beautiful, it may be the first recorded video of this fish swimming. And this is what I looked at when I drew this animal so that I could get the proportions right. And to see the way in which it moves its fins. It's a wonderful video to look at, to see this animal alive, because often we see these animals once they've been pulled out of nets and they're dead on the surface, and they really don't look the same way as when they're alive. The lumpfish is an excellent example of that. You see this, the blobfish.
The blobfish.
It looks ridiculous when it's dead. It's got these strange blobby bits, and it looks like it's got this nose.
It gets such a bad rap for being ugly, but it's really nice when it's actually at its proper depth.
Right? It looks more proportioned. It's because the water supports it, right?
Yeah.
They're not evolved to live in an environment without the buoyancy of water to keep themselves up. They can have these soft parts. We have strong skeletons to hold us up because we work against gravity. But when you have buoyancy of water around, you don't have to worry about that. So your blobby parts can just kind of fill space as they're supposed to.
Yeah.
Well, a big thank you to everyone who joined us today. It makes my heart so warm to see so many people care about our deep sea. We'd love for anyone to share your drawings with us. So please email them to us to be featured on the website. And we also have a deep ocean ecosystem resource that you can print out and make more creative activities with. And there's another Learn to Draw on May 27th. That's going to be focusing all on links. So I hope to see you all there. And I'm going to have us close out with maybe Megan showing a few other videos, and Julius, you have something last
one
to say.
quick thing I wanted to point out. I always say this at the end, but if we talked about legislators and reaching out to government officials, if you want to use your drawings to illustrate letters and emails to them to show this is what's important to me, please protect this. That's a wonderful way to get their attention. Visuals help. So that's all I have to say. But Megan, yes, please.
Okay. This is actually so this is a toadfish, and this is another example of a bioluminescent deep sea fish. So it has a lure just like the anglerfish we just looked at, and it's just right at kind of where our nose would be. It's kind of in this center part here. So this was a fun little fish, and also a good example of, this is kind of what the blobfish looks like when it's at depth, and then it turns into that pink mass when you bring it up. So this was, I believe this was at about 2,000 meters down, if I remember correctly. But yeah, you can see this little indentation in between its eyes, and that's where it houses its lure that it uses. So that was a fun fish that we saw.
And I love the way it's using its pelvic fins like feet.
Yeah.
So cool.
Yeah, which is why it has its it's called a toadfish. It really does kind of look like a toad just perched. Um, but yeah, we see so many fun different animals in the deep sea. I personally really love the squishies that we see all through the water column. So whenever we would do a dive on our way back up, there's a lot of water column that you're searching through to have a look at what species are around. This is a really fun example. This is a solitary tunicate. It's a larvation. And so essentially in the center of this mass here is this tiny little body and then a long tail. And it's housed by what scientists call a snot mansion, which essentially these larvations, they produce um, copious amounts of mucus, which is very sticky, and they spend their days living in the water column. And so all of the little speckles that you're seeing that kind of makes it, look like it's stars are particles that it's picked up within the water column, and it will just float there. And then every so often, the larvation, which, the little critter is this little body here, it will consume that mucus net, and then it will create a new one and it will, digest all the particles, and then it will create a new one. So they live in these little snot mansions.
And they use the snot to fish basically for marine stuff.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
amazing. That's amazing.
We have a little question in the chat,
yeah.
which is a toadfish a kind of anglerfish?
So it's not a kind of anglerfish. When we think of anglerfish, we think of the one that we just particularly looked at. It also has a lure, so they're closely related, but it it wouldn't be lumped into the same category as an anglerfish, although it does have a lure. But a lot of these common names are kind of nonsense anyway. I mean, toadfish isn't a species, and an anglerfish isn't a species, but it is all kind of part of that same group, but it's usually not referred to as an anglerfish, even though it does use a lure.
So
Awesome.
they're
Thanks,
related
Megan.
families, yes?
Pardon?
Related families of
Yes. Yeah.
animals.
Yeah. And then this is an example. I have so many videos of siphonophores. This is a colonial animal. So it's just a whole bunch of different individuals that essentially grow out in this long line. And they do different functions. So there are some individuals within this long chain, and they can get meters long. These animals can grow very, very large. And some feed, some reproduce. They do different things, but same idea. They just float in the water column and live their life in the pelagic zone. So
It's
Oh,
kind of like a
cool.
superorganism, isn't it? Like of several
yeah,
different individuals in the colony doing different things. It's kind of like
yeah.
functioning like different organs almost, right?
Yeah, so it's
Mm.
called it's a polymorphic species, so it means that it's colonial, but every zooid that it creates can do a different function. So yeah, some are for defense, some are for reproduction, some are for food capture, and yeah, they have everything they need within this colony, and they can just keep growing and keep growing. So yeah.
And how big does the snot mansion one get? That's another question in the chat.
Yeah, so they can get, so that was quite a zoom up. So that individual, that snot mansion was probably only about maybe 3 centimeters to 5 centimeters wide, but they can get quite large. I think the largest one I've seen was maybe about like 20 centimeters across, but it yeah, it's not necessarily beneficial for them to create more snot. It kind of depends on um how strong the structure is. Like it can spread out sometimes if it's not adhering well, which makes the animal look, or like the snot mansion look bigger, but that's not necessarily advantageous. It's more advantageous for it to create a pretty dense, well-encompassed house so that it can capture more particles, and then it doesn't have to expend as much energy making as much mucus, which does cost them a lot energetically.
And when you think about it, this is a beautiful example of the application of mathematics. There's a ratio between the surface area and the volume of any
Yeah.
structure that the way it goes is that the larger the structure is, the larger the proportion of the larger the ratio of the volume is to the surface area. So in other words, it takes more energy to create it, but you don't get as much harvesting of this marine snow as you would for a smaller one. So it makes beautiful sense.
Yeah.
We have another question. Are humpback anglerfish on the endangered list?
They are on the IUCN list, but they are right now listed as least concern. But I think arguably it's because again, we don't know that much about the deep sea. So my argument is that probably most deep sea animals should be on the endangered list. But right now it's on as least concern because there's no active fishery for it. And it's not necessarily just in a place where there's, mining proposed. So because it is an animal that can kind of swim away, it usually gets bumped down on the IUCN list. But there are a lot of unseen threats to the deep ocean. So, again, the loss of oxygen, the warming temperatures, the loss of particulate organic carbon. So that the amount of marine snow that is reaching the seafloor is decreasing every year. So, yeah, it's listed as least concern, but I would also argue that, we have very limited experiences actually even viewing anglerfish. This one in particular, I think there's only been 2 instances where we've seen the males and females reproduce of the humpback anglerfish. So we know that it doesn't do that permanent fused attachment. So, how much can you really tell if you've only really seen this animal a few times? But right now it's listed as least concern.
The other thing to keep in mind, things can change really rapidly. A good
Yeah.
example of that with climate change, for example, the saiga antelope in Asia is one that numbered in enormous numbers, but a small change in the amount of humidity and temperature in its environment caused a normally harmless bacterium in its respiratory system to become pathogenic or cause disease. And it caused 100% mortality in many of the herds. And there was like 200,000 animals lost just like that. And it went from being very common to critically endangered almost overnight. These things are not always foreseeable. And so we need to realize that just because an animal is listed as least concern, we think it's very common, that will not necessarily last. And we know the Earth is changing in a very disturbing way. So we have to be very...
And we actually we're seeing that in the deep sea, like off our coast in the Tongguan Hachikwaksiki MPA, where we have a lot of cold water corals and sponges. Recently, and it hasn't been published yet, but there's science coming out that we're seeing a huge decrease in the health and the presence of some of these cold water corals and sponges. In some sites, we're seeing 80+% decline in like a 3-year time period. So things are changing really rapidly.
The counterpoint to that, or I always like to try to find
End on a positive.
well, not to end on a positive, well, that too, but
Yeah.
it's easy to become overwhelmed by the scariness of it, and we should be alarmed. We should, but also remember we can make a difference. That's the important thing to remember, is that we don't want to succumb to despair because we don't need to. There's no good reason to do that. We actually can make differences. In terms of corals, and the tropical corals in this case, there are beautiful efforts, successful efforts at cultivating corals that are being lost by bleaching to create coral reefs afresh. And it's working because biology is wonderfully diverse, and there are individuals that show more resistance to temperature changes. And we're finding those and planting them deliberately, and the reefs are responding well to that. We can do things. We need to be smart. We need to figure out ways to make a difference, and we can. That's the key thing to remember. Always have hope, because there's good reason for it. It's alarming. We need to be aware of the problems, but we most certainly can do stuff about it too.
Good message.
Thank you.
Love that. I love ending on that note as well. Well, a huge thank you to both Megan and Julius for joining
Thank
us,
you,
as well as
everybody.
everyone else for joining
Thanks
us,
for having me.
to learn a little bit more about deep ocean ecosystems. And I hope everyone has a lovely rest of their day.
Enjoy. Thank you so much, everyone.